February 4th wasn't just a date, it was a threshold. Something shifted, quietly, precisely, without warning. Not everyone felt it. Not everyone was meant to. This isn't motivation. This isn't comfort. This is an explanation for the pressure you couldn't ignore. If nothing changed for you, this isn't for you. But if something inside you tightened, if the noise stopped working, if you felt like time itself leaned in, then this already started, and there is no going back. The day the signal changed. February 4th did not arrive loudly. There were no sirens, no skies tearing open, no public announcement warning people that something irreversible had begun. That was the first deception. Most people woke up believing this was just another ordinary day. The same routines, the same scrolling, the same noise designed to keep their attention outward, distracted, fragmented. But beneath the surface, beneath the familiar hum of daily life, the signal had already shifted. And once it shifts, it does not shift back. For weeks before February 4th, subtle disruptions had been accumulating. People dismissed them as stress, exhaustion, coincidence. Sleep patterns fractured. Time felt distorted, either racing uncontrollably or dragging with unnatural heaviness. Old memories resurfaced without invitation. Certain faces, certain moments, certain truths refused to stay buried. This was not nostalgia, it was retrieval. On February 4th, the pressure crossed a threshold. Something ancient does not awaken all at once. It tightens, it tests, it isolates. It waits until the internal structure of a person is either strong enough to hold truth or weak enough to shatter under it. And that morning, a line was crossed. Those who were sensitive felt it first, a heaviness in the chest, a low-frequency tension beneath the skin. A sense that something was watching, not from above, not from outside, but from within, as if a dormant layer of perception had been turned back on without permission. This was not comfort. This was activation. The intense spiritual phase that began on February 4th was not designed for mass participation. That is the part most people misunderstand. It was never meant to wake everyone up. It was meant to separate. Pressure does that. Pressure reveals. As the day unfolded, subtle fractures appeared. Conversations felt hollow. Familiar environments suddenly felt foreign. People noticed a growing intolerance for lies, especially the ones they had been telling themselves. Things that once felt acceptable now felt unbearable. Jobs, relationships, identities, roles that had been worn for survival began to itch like a skin that no longer fit. This is where most people try to go back. But this phase does not allow retreat. What made February 4th different was not intensity alone. It was direction. The pressure was no longer random. It was precise, targeted, personal. Each person felt it in the area they had avoided the longest. For some, it was truth about who they had become. For others, it was truth about who they never allowed themselves to be. And for a few, it was the realization that the life they built was never aligned with the reason they were here. That realization is violent. The mind resists first. It tries to rationalize the discomfort away. You're tired. You're overthinking. This will pass. But the body knows better. The body recognizes when a frequency has changed, when the old coping mechanisms stop working, when the noise can no longer drown out the signal. By midday, something became clear to those paying attention. This phase was not about gaining something new. It was about losing what was false. That is why most people aren't ready. Spiritual intensity is romanticized as light, expansion, bliss. But the true beginning is confrontation. It strips illusions before it offers clarity. It removes comfort before it reveals purpose. And it does not ask for consent. February 4th marked the moment when avoidance stopped working. People who had spent years outrunning their own intuition suddenly found nowhere left to hide. Distractions failed. Numbing failed. The external world lost its grip. Silence grew louder than noise. And in that silence, something spoke. Not in words, but in knowing. A knowing that could not be undone. By nightfall, the internal divide was visible. Some people doubled down on denial. They sought louder noise, stronger distractions, anything to push the pressure away. Others felt something collapse inside them, not in destruction, but in surrender. Those were the ones who felt fear and relief at the same time, because deep down they understood something terrifying. This was not a phase that would pass in days or weeks. This was a point of no return. February 4th did not begin a spiritual journey. It ended the illusion that one could be postponed. And the real danger, the twist most people don't see yet, is this. The intensity is not increasing randomly. It is increasing in response. Something is watching who resists and who listens. The separation effect. The first mistake people made after February 4th was assuming the intensity would fade once they acknowledged it. It didn't. It sharpened. By the second phase, the pressure was no longer subtle. It became selective. Two people could stand in the same room, hear the same words, experience the same moment, and walk away altered in completely different ways. One would feel nothing. The other would feel exposed, cracked open, destabilized. That difference was not random. This is when the separation began. Not externally, internally. The world did not split into the awake and the asleep in any obvious way. There were no visible markers, no declarations, no public signs. The division happened quietly, invisibly, in the private spaces where no one performs. Inside thoughts, inside reactions, inside moments of silence when no one is watching. People began to notice something unsettling. Their tolerance for certain energies vanished. Conversations that once felt normal now felt draining or false. People they had known for years suddenly felt distant, almost incompatible. There was nothing dramatic about it, just a subtle repulsion, like two frequencies no longer able to occupy the same space. This is where many tried to force connection. They told themselves they were overreacting. They tried to maintain harmony, to smooth the discomfort, to pretend nothing had changed. But the body does not lie when alignment breaks, and the more they ignored it, the heavier the pressure became. Because this phase does not reward comfort, it rewards honesty. By this point, some began experiencing what felt like internal audits, moments when a thought would surface uninvited, demanding examination. Why are you still here? Why are you pretending this is enough? Who are you protecting by staying silent? These were not gentle questions. They came with consequences. People who ignored them felt exhaustion deepen into something heavier. Not tiredness, resistance, fatigue. A constant sense of being drained no matter how much rest they got. The mind grew foggy. Motivation collapsed. Old coping mechanisms lost their effect. This wasn't burnout. It was misalignment asserting itself. Meanwhile, those who stopped resisting, who allowed the discomfort to speak, noticed something equally disturbing. As layers peeled away, clarity replaced confusion. But clarity did not feel safe. It felt lonely. Because once you see certain truths, pretending becomes impossible. This is when relationships began to fracture. Not always through conflict, often through silence. People drifted, messages went unanswered, invitations stopped arriving, shared jokes lost their spark. It felt like abandonment, but it wasn't. It was divergence. The phase had begun filtering based on readiness, not intention. And here is the part most people don't expect. The isolation was not punishment. It was protection. As the intensity increased, Emotional exposure became dangerous. Certain truths cannot be revealed in crowded spaces. Certain transformations cannot survive constant interference. The phase required containment, space, withdrawal, so it removed what could interfere. This is why some people felt suddenly alone, even surrounded by others. The separation effect is subtle but ruthless. It doesn't ask who you want to be connected to. It reveals who you are aligned with. And alignment, once activated, cannot be negotiated. By now, patterns were merging. Those who clung to external validation grew more unstable. Those who turned inward, though terrified, began stabilizing in a strange new way. Less reactive, less eager to explain themselves, less afraid of not being understood. That shift scared the people around them, because nothing unsettles others more than someone who no longer needs permission. And here came the second illusion-breaking moment. Some realized that the pressure they felt was not external opposition. It was internal compression. They weren't being attacked. They were being condensed. Potential does not expand freely. It compresses first, like a star forming under gravitational force. The more resistance, the more heat. The more heat, the closer it gets to ignition. This phase was not trying to elevate everyone. It was testing structural integrity. By the end of this chapter, one truth became impossible to ignore. Those who tried to drag others with them felt weaker. Those who let go, even painfully, felt stronger. And that led to the most dangerous realization yet. Not everyone you love can go where this is heading. Not because they are bad, not because they are wrong, but because this phase is not collective. It is selective. And the twist, the one most people won't see until it's too late, is this. The separation is accelerating, and once it completes, reconnection will no longer be possible in the same way. The internal collapse. The third phase did not announce itself. It arrived as a quiet breakdown, not the kind people post about, not the kind that earns sympathy or explanation. This collapse happened internally, where language failed and distraction could no longer reach. People began to realize that what was unraveling was not their life, but the framework they had used to survive it. That distinction matters, because survival structures are not designed to hold truth. They are designed to endure pain without questioning it. And February 4th had initiated a process that no longer tolerated endurance without awareness. By now, avoidance had consequences. Thoughts became louder. Emotions refused suppression. Long-buried realizations surfaced at inconvenient moments, during work, during conversations, during silence. It felt as if something inside was dismantling old defenses piece by piece with surgical precision. This is where panic often appears. People describe it as anxiety, but that word is insufficient. Anxiety implies fear of something unknown. This was fear of something known, something that had been sensed for years but never faced. The truth is rarely shocking when it arrives. It is devastating because it confirms what you already suspected. This phase forced confrontation with one central question. Who are you without the roles you built to be accepted? For many, that question triggered grief. Not for lost people, but for lost versions of themselves. The version that stayed quiet, the version that compromised, the version that learned how to be palatable instead of authentic. Those versions do not dissolve peacefully. They fight. Internally, resistance manifested as exhaustion, irritability, sudden sadness, or emotional numbness. The psyche attempted to preserve the old structure, but the structure had already been destabilized. The pressure was too precise, too targeted. This was not destruction. It was reorganization. Some people experienced moments of terrifying clarity, brief flashes where everything made sense at once. Their patterns, their delays, their choices, their fears. These moments didn't last long. They vanished quickly, leaving behind a residue of knowing that could not be erased. That residue is dangerous, because once you know, pretending becomes betrayal. And betrayal of self produces symptoms no amount of external reassurance can fix. This is why the third phase is where most people try to quit. They attempt to label the experience as unhealthy, unrealistic, or self-indulgent. They seek authority figures, doctrines, routines, anything to restore the old certainty. But certainty no longer responds. The old answers feel hollow. The old truths no longer fit the questions being asked. This is the point where spirituality stops being comforting. It becomes confrontational. Not everything that collapses here is negative, but everything that collapses here is necessary. The internal collapse removes false coherence, the stories that kept things together but were never true. And when false coherence dissolves, silence expands. In that silence, something unsettling emerges, a deeper sense of responsibility. Not guilt, not blame, responsibility. The realization that no one else is coming to explain this for you, that no belief system can carry you through it, that whatever is unfolding requires participation, not spectatorship. This is when people realize the phase is not happening to them, it is happening through them. And that realization carries weight. Some feel it as pressure behind the eyes, others as tension in the chest, others as a quiet certainty that certain paths are now closed, permanently. Options that once felt available now feel inaccessible, not because they disappeared, but because returning would require self-erasure. By the end of this phase, one thing becomes clear. You cannot unknow what you are becoming aware of. And here lies the twist that destabilizes even the strong. The collapse is not a failure of identity. It is proof that the identity was temporary. What replaces it will not arrive immediately. There is a gap, an uncomfortable, undefined space where the old self is gone and the new one has not yet stabilized. Most people fear this space. They rush to fill it, to define it, to escape it. But that space is the threshold, and once crossed, nothing familiar will anchor you again. Because Chapter 3 is not about breaking, it is about displacement. And in the next phase, something begins to take its place. The point of no return. By the time the fourth phase began, denial was no longer an option. Not because people suddenly became brave, but because the internal terrain had changed too much to pretend otherwise. The old self was no longer available as a refuge. Returning to it felt artificial, even repulsive, like trying to move back into a house after realizing the foundation was rotten. This is the phase where choice becomes unavoidable. Up until now, the pressure could still be interpreted as confusion, exhaustion, or temporary upheaval. But now it crystallized into something sharper: direction. A quiet but unmistakable pull towards certain actions, and an equally strong resistance toward others. This is where the line appears. Not between good and bad, not between right and wrong, between alignment and self-betrayal. People noticed that when they moved in alignment, spoke truth, withdrew from what drained them, stopped explaining themselves, the pressure eased. Not entirely, but enough to breathe. When they ignored the pull and tried to resume old behaviors, the pressure intensified immediately. The system responded in real time. This was not coincidence. This phase introduced consequence, not punishment. Feedback. The universe, reality, whatever language one uses, stopped being neutral. It began responding to internal integrity. Moves made from fear carried weight. Moves made from clarity carried momentum. This terrified people, because it meant they could no longer hide behind confusion. The excuse of not knowing expired. Intuition became loud enough to override rationalization. Every delay felt heavier, every compromise felt visible to themselves. This is where many experienced sudden life shifts. Opportunities vanished, relationships ended abruptly, plans collapsed without warning, not gradually, cleanly, almost surgically. What no longer aligned was removed, often without negotiation. At first, it felt cruel. Then, it felt precise. This is the phase where people realize the intensity was never meant to be survived. It was meant to be answered, and answering requires sacrifice, not symbolic sacrifice, real sacrifice, comfort, familiarity, validation, sometimes entire futures that once seemed guaranteed. The phase does not ask what you want, it asks what you are willing to release, because what comes next requires space. Here is where the psychological danger peaks. Standing at the threshold with no clear image of what's on the other side. The mind demands certainty, proof, guarantees. But this phase offers none. It offers only resonance, an internal sense of this is right, without external confirmation. That is why most people turn back here. Not because they lack strength, because they crave reassurance. But reassurance belongs to the old world. Crossing this point means accepting that clarity will come after commitment, not before. That faith, real faith, is not belief without evidence, but action without comfort. By now, a new sensation appears for those who continue. Stillness, not peace. Stillness, a grounded quiet beneath the intensity. A sense of being held in place as if the chaos around them is no longer random. This stillness is deceptive. It feels like rest, but it is actually stabilization. Something is locking in. And here is the twist that redefines everything that came before. The intense spiritual phase was never about awakening consciousness. It was about positioning people for what follows. Those who cross this point are no longer preparing. They are being placed into roles they did not choose consciously, placed into timelines that do not intersect with the majority, placed into responsibility rather than revelation. And once placement begins, resistance no longer looks like fear. It looks like loss. Because walking away now doesn't return you to who you were. It leaves you suspended between worlds. This is why Chapter 4 is the most dangerous. Not because of what happens if you continue, but because of what happens if you don't. What was waiting all along? The fifth phase does not arrive with intensity. It arrives with clarity. That is what makes it unsettling. After pressure, collapse, separation, and commitment, people expect something dramatic, a reward, a revelation, a surge of power or certainty. Instead, what emerges is a quiet recognition that feels older than memory. A realization that this path was not chosen recently. It was remembered. Those who crossed the point of no return begin to notice subtle but irreversible changes. Not externally at first, internally. Their reactions slow. Their tolerance for distortion drops to zero. They stop chasing explanations. They stop needing permission to trust what they see. This is not confidence. It is alignment settling into the body. The chaos that once felt overwhelming now feels distant, almost irrelevant. Not because the world has calmed, but because their internal reference point has shifted. They are no longer reacting from fear of loss. They are responding from clarity of function. Function. That word matters more than purpose here. Purpose is inspirational. Function is operational. This phase reveals that the intensity was never about personal growth alone. It was about capacity, about how much truth a person could hold without fragmenting, about whether they could remain grounded while seeing clearly, about whether they could act without needing applause. By now, something sobering becomes obvious. This awakening does not make life easier. It makes it sharper. The illusions are gone. The excuses have expired. The internal compass is active at all times. There is no off switch, no comfortable ignorance to retreat into. Once you see the patterns within people, systems, timelines, you cannot unsee them, and that comes with cost. Some feel grief for the simplicity they lost. Others feel anger at how long they were delayed. Some feel nothing at all, just a steady readiness, as if waiting for instructions that will not arrive in words. Because this phase does not operate through messages, it operates through placement. People begin to find themselves in specific situations without effort. Conversations happen at precise moments. Decisions align without force. The sense of being early or late disappears. Time feels coordinated rather than rushed. This is not manifestation, it is synchronization. And here comes the final twist, the one that reframes everything. The intense spiritual phase was never about saving you. It was about assigning you, not to a grand role, not to a public mission, but to positions of quiet influence, structural stability, and unseen leverage. Roles that require clarity without recognition, strength without validation, presence without explanation. This is why the path was isolating. This is why reassurance was removed. This is why comfort was stripped away. Because what follows cannot be carried by people who need to be seen agreeing with it. Those who complete this phase often feel a strange mix of relief and gravity. Relief that the internal conflict has ended. Gravity because they understand something irreversible has occurred. They are no longer asking what comes next. They are ready to respond when it arrives. And it will. Not as spectacle, as necessity. February 4th did not begin a spiritual event. It initiated a sorting process. Those who resisted returned to familiar timelines. Those who crossed stabilized into new ones. And the difference between them will grow, not through superiority, but through direction. One group will keep searching for meaning. The other will quietly become part of the mechanism that shapes it. And if you've made it this far, if something in you recognized these words rather than simply reading them, then this is the final thing you need to understand. You were never behind. You were never broken. You were never waiting for permission. You were being prepared for a phase that could not begin until you were strong enough to survive it. And now, it has. The phase is complete. The placement has begun.